Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for a few more people to arrive so that we have a quorum. One unusual thing that's going to happen with the meeting today is that both our chair and our vice chair are unable to be here today. The chair had to leave due to a family illness, and the vice chair had another situation that required him to be out of town. So what we're going to do is, according to our bylaws, we can, once we have a quorum, we can select a temporary chair to chair this meeting, and we will do that as soon as we have a quorum, and then we'll get underway. So watch this space. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have a quorum now. So if we've already, the chair was kind enough to reach out to one of our members to see if she would be willing to serve in the capacity of the temporary chair. So if I could get a motion of.
I'll move that Mayor Frank serve as the temporary chair for today's meeting.
So it's been moved that Mayor Frank serve as the temporary chair, and we have a second. And we will, by voice, all in favor of Mayor Frank serving as temporary chair for the meeting. Signal by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No opposed? Mayor Frank, please come take this gavel for me.
All right, we will go ahead and get started. The first item on the agenda under tab 1 is the minutes of the June 2023 meeting. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Any changes, questions, or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, next, Dr. Lippard with a commission and staff update.
Thank you, Chairman. So under the commission update, we have one new member to welcome today. So if you could join me in welcoming our newest member, Mayor Bob Ryle of Dixon County. Mayor Ryle. And we're saying goodbye today to Mayor Buddy Bradshaw of Loudoun County, and we want to thank the mayor for his excellent service to the commission. Then I'm sorry, we also have two of our members who have been reappointed, and that's County Clerk Mary Gaither and Commissioner Denise Thomas. So congratulations to them on their reappointments. And then under staff updates, we are also saying goodbye to Senior Research Associate Chris Belton, who you'll remember from our rather extensive rail study. Chris is moving on to new adventures in New York, and so we want to thank Chris for all his work. He's not with us here today, but I'm sure he's watching live. So we want to thank Chris for all his work and wish him the absolute best in future endeavors. And I will say, Chris, I really appreciate he gave us, he's known this move was coming, and as soon as he knew, he gave us an extensive notice, so we were able to transition, and we really appreciate his professionalism and all his hard work. Thank you.
All right, next we will introduce Jennifer Berry to go over tab 3, which is Public Chapter 1043, Acts of 2022, the utility scale solar energy development. This is a final report for approval. We will need to vote on this today.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good afternoon, everybody, members. I'm presenting the final report addressing utility scale solar energy development in the state for your approval. We prepared the report in response to Public Chapter 1043, Acts of 2022, which directs the Commission to study 14 points. 13 of the points address the development of utility scale solar, and one addresses concerns related to consumer protection in the residential solar market. The Commission is required to report its findings and recommendations no later than September 30th, 2023. In response to questions and comments from members at the last meeting when we presented the draft report, we added some information, which is shaded gray throughout the report. As requested by Representative Hazelwood on page 30, we added information about projections through 2040 for loss of farmland to all development in Tennessee. Commissioner Bryson had asked about the economic viability of utility-scale solar projects, and to address this question, we added the response from the Tennessee Solar Energy Industries Association, TACIR, on page 16. In a footnote on page 20, we added more explanation of TVA's pilots to respond to a question from Mayor Anderson, and in response to Councilman Carlisle's questions on page 27, we added a little more information about lithium batteries, and on page 16, in footnote 10, a statement about the use of eminent domain. Since we presented the draft report at the last meeting, we have received comments from stakeholders, including 3 nonprofit organizations and 1 solar developer in the state. We reviewed and considered their comments and made some changes to reflect their input, which are also highlighted gray throughout the report. We also received additional information from Tennessee and TVA about solar facilities that are in some phase of development or in operation in the state. And using that information, we updated Table 2 on page 17, which is the list of facilities in construction or operation, and the maps 1 and 2, which are on pages 32 and 34. Map 1 shows those facilities along with prime farmland, and map 2 shows those facilities along with county zoning. We also added map 3 on page 35, which shows megawatts across the state that we know of that are in pre-construction development. To conclude, the report's 3 recommendations have not changed since we presented the draft report. They are, first, the Commission recommends that the TDEC Office of Energy Programs continue to expand and maintain its existing website with additional guidance and resources on utility-scale solar for local governments, landowners, developers, and the public, like Kentucky. Representatives of that office say they're willing to do so. The Commission recommends that the TDEC Office of Energy Programs, this is the second recommendation, that the TDEC Office of Energy Programs continue to expand and maintain its website that provides guidance and resources on residential solar for the public. Representatives of that office say they're willing to do so. And finally, recognizing that care would need to be taken to avoid undermining the intent of the General Assembly's past efforts at tort reform, the Commission recommends that the state consider raising the penalty for violations of the Consumer Protection Act if the good or service involved has a value greater than a monetary threshold set by the state. And with that, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I request your approval of this final report.
Any questions for Director Barry? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve. Any further discussion? Any other questions? Hearing none, all in favor signify by aye. Opposed? Thank you, Director Barry.
Thank you very much.
Next, we will, are we having a panel? Okay, I just didn't, I guess all the panelists can come forward? Okay. Dr. Mike Strickland will introduce everyone. This is for House Joint Resolution 139, Housing Affordability Impact Fees and Development Taxes, and we will have another panel tomorrow on this same subject. Dr. Strickland? Yes.
Before Dr. Strickland starts, I did want to bring the members' attention to a handout that's in the front flap of your docket book. This isn't the material that the panelists are going to be going over today, but I just wanted to give you some of the a sample of some of the early work that the team, Dr. Strickland and Michael Mountain and the rest of the team are working on in terms of both housing availability and housing affordability. So what you have in your docket book, and this is available on our website as well for anyone watching at home. It has a map that shows the number of housing units needed by county to equal Tennessee's housing availability rate. So this is a first blush attempt to try to get at what housing availability looks like at the county level, and this is something the team came up with, because most of the indicators that were out there didn't really go down to the county level. They were at the metro statistical area. This does not reflect housing affordability. This is just housing availability, so this, which is correlated, but it is separate. And it also doesn't get at things like the quality of housing. So if there was an area with a lot of blighted housing, it's just going to show that as available housing. So it is far from a perfect measure, but it's a first blush. And in addition to the map, there is also a table attached which shows each of the factors that went into the equation for each county and the total for each county. And then at the bottom of the map, there is a little example of how the calculation was done. So just wanted the members to have that, to get an idea of kind of one of the many directions the team is going with this. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Strickland.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Commissioners. So as you may remember, at the June 2023 meeting, the Commission adopted to the work program a study requested by House Resolution 139 by Representative Sparks on the factors behind housing affordability in the state. By most any measure, housing affordability has grown worse in recent years. While from 1980 to 1999, the national median home price tended to be between about 3.1 and 3.4 times the median household income. As of this year, that ratio reached approximately 5.8 in Tennessee. Meanwhile, as of 2021, roughly 1 in 4 Tennessee households were paying at least 30% of their income towards housing, a level at which they are considered to be cost burdened. So simply put, many Tennesseans are now either unable to buy a home or else can barely afford the one that they have. Staff will present a draft report at the December 2023 Commission meeting and the final report in January 2024. Because of the size and scope of the issue, Commission staff have organized 2 panels on housing affordability, one today and one tomorrow. And today, 6 panelists will be discussing housing issues that they and their communities are confronting. So we have with us today Mr. Ben Bentley, Executive Director of the Knoxville Community Development Corporation, Mayor Joe Carr of Rutherford County, Jens Christensen, Chief Executive Officer of Habitat for Humanity of Greater Chattanooga, Mayor Scott Conger of the City of Jackson, Angela Hubbard, Director of the Housing Division of the National Planning Department, and John Zena, Director of the Memphis and Shelby County Division of Planning and Development.
All right, Mr. Bentley, we will start with you, and we have asked today's panelists to try to limit your comments or remarks to 5 minutes, and then we will leave plenty of time for questions and answers.
All right. Thank you. Thanks to the Commission for the invite. Ben Bentley, CEO, Knoxville's Community Development Corporation. We're the Housing Authority and Redevelopment Agency for the City of Knoxville and Knox County. We touch the housing market in 3 pretty unique ways. So we own and manage about 4,000 units of affordable housing, mixed income housing, and a little bit of market rate housing mixed in there as well. So we understand the dire need, the significant waiting list for housing in Knox County at all different price points, serving all different populations. We also build a whole lot of housing, so we've got about 150 million under development right now. These are new units, so we get the not frustration, but the challenges that private sector, nonprofits, and in some cases public entities experience when they're trying to build new things. Not just interest rate environment and costs, but also all of the local hurdles that are sometimes in place that make it a little more challenging, but sometimes they're there for a reason, so we have to balance those things. The third thing that we do as an entity that's a little different probably from most housing authorities, we administer the Industrial Development Board. We also have significant redevelopment areas, so tax increment finance and pilots, pretty much any incentive that flows to any type of project in Knoxville and Knox County, but especially housing. That's a point of emphasis right now. Goes through our organization. We kick the tires on the financial assessment on the front end to really make sure that there is a need for those incentives. But the goal of all this is to increase housing affordability, increase housing supply, just create a market where there's more housing being built by the private sector. So we've got pretty good background on all of those things, and I'm not going to belabor those points. I'm much more interested in questions from y'all after this, so thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Carr.
Thank you very much for having me. The opportunity for this resolution, the timing for it couldn't be better. Rutherford County just reached the minimum population threshold for those areas outside the city of Murfreesboro that already has a Murfreesboro Housing Department to create a Rutherford County Development Board. And so it's interesting, when I was sworn into office on September 1st, the Finance Department came to me, Director Michael Smith, and said, we have a real legitimate growing need. Indeed, it's becoming a crisis in Rutherford County. I'm sure this panel understands that Rutherford County is the fastest growing county in the state, according to the Tennessee Comptroller's Office, growing 9,000 to 10,000 new residents every year, which translates to 1,200 to 1,500 new students every year, and affordable housing because of the pressure put on by the influx of residents to Rutherford County. Affordable housing is at the top of my list of issues to resolve. We've just reached that threshold where now that we can establish a Rutherford County Community Development Department, and I'm interested in hearing what my colleagues have to say in that regard, because I think equipping Rutherford County with the tools not only to ensure that existing housing is affordable, those homes that are already available, or maintain that affordability by limiting the increase in property taxes, which unfortunately we just had to do to pay for our growth, but also providing opportunities for how we establish new areas, making it affordable for people who have been here all their lives to stay in Rutherford County. So I'm looking forward to seeing some positive results so Rutherford County can move forward in providing those services. And I, too, will be glad to take questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Mr. Christensen?
Hi, thank you for the invitation as well. I'm Vince Christensen. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Habitat for Humanity of Greater Chattanooga. Rather than belabor what Habitat does, I think most of you know, I would like to thank the members for the support both on the legislative level and individually and personally for Habitat across the state of Tennessee. I actually want to take a couple of moments to talk about some policy levers that might be considered as you all consider drafting policy in accordance with affordable housing. In general, I see a lot of great work coming out in the LIHTC and pilot world, and then with other zoning and subsidy incentives that are actually made at the legislative level that typically focus only on rental. And there's nothing wrong with that. Rental and affordable housing is a very important part of the landscape. But I would like to take a moment to talk about why you might consider the policy levers that you can use to actually think about ownership as affordable housing. So I've got a couple of slides that I put together that mostly are based on data that actually came from the Urban Institute study from last year, looking at factual information. The first is that it's actually cheaper on day one to look at ownership than it is rental, because if you look, this is a Zillow data point, but if you look, typically the average rental cost was in the $1,700 area, whereas the average ownership cost was in the $1,400 a month area. So it actually became cheaper on very much day one to look at ownership. The second component of that is that it is cheaper over time. And if you look at that graph that's up on the screen right now, you will see that the yellow line is your mortgage payment. Okay, that's the baseline of a mortgage payment. You will see that it slightly increases, and that is because the mortgage payment will actually include escrow typically, which is going to be your tax base increase as well as your insurance increase, and that will appreciate over time. You will have growth in that cost, but your mortgage is typically fixed from day one for a period of, generally speaking, 30 years on average. Rent, on the other hand, it does what we like to say in the finance world, it compounds. It increases as cost of living increase happens every year. And so you will see the blue line go up a trajectory over 30 years where you have a substantial increased cost for rental. Okay, if you go to the next part of this, though, we have to think about subsidy. This is often where policy levers actually favor your rental, right? Because you think the subsidy is going to be less. In fact, it couldn't be any further from the truth. Your subsidy on day one is going to be less. What you do, if you think about it in the short term, you can achieve a greater number of doors in affordable housing by looking at rental, right? Because you have to invest less on day one. But if you look at the course of 30 years, you see the same problem. The orange line is on average what you're going to spend for a family, and this is in Chattanooga. We've had similar experiences to what my peers up here in the panel have had, where our median income or median price of a home has more than doubled over the past few years. We're seeing a great trajectory, but this is in Chattanooga in real time. I say real time, I base it on a 6% interest rate, so it's changed slightly in the past 2 months, right? We see that changing, but if you look at 70% of area median income for a family of 3 in Chattanooga, they can afford a $1,250 monthly payment, okay? That's what this is based upon. If you look at that, they are going to need about a $37,000 subsidy to buy a $200,000 home. Real numbers in our area for what's affordable for a family of 3, okay? To do that on day one, yes, we have to have a $37,000 subsidy. But in rental, you look total and you're gonna have over $700,000 of subsidy for the same family staying at the same income over 30 years. So if you think we're not even looking at time value of money, we're not looking at those things, we're just thinking about simple straight line dollars. It is substantially cheaper to actually put somebody into a home ownership situation on the long haul. And the final slide is it's a lot better for the family. If what we're doing is we're trying to build a stronger Tennessee, a stronger state that has better workforce opportunities, better educational opportunities, and lower poverty rates, we need to actually have a method to transform generational poverty and turn that into generational wealth. Well, what you've done here, if you look at the blue line, the rent payment is going out of pocket, right? Every time you have a household making a rental payment, it's going into someone else's pocket. But when they are a buyer, the yellow line, you're looking at how much of their housing money actually goes out of their pocket goes out of their pocket. The remainder, the difference between those two lines, that's what stays in their pocket. It is actually a quasi-savings account that builds wealth over time and reduces dependency on the government. The easiest way I can display this in Chattanooga terms is we took a study at our Habitat homeowners, and we realized that over the past decade plus, these homeowners have put $2 million back into property taxes, whereas most of those homeowners previously were in subsidized rental housing, which was subsidized by our tax dollars. Thank you.
Mayor Conger.
Thank you for the opportunity of having us today. West Tennessee is a little different than Middle and East Tennessee. We're just now starting to see that crunch, and over the last couple of years, especially with the announcement of Blue Oval City coming to West Tennessee, we're starting to see home prices rise, affordability go down. So what we're doing in Jackson, our initial goals now are to increase and diversify housing supply, preserve our existing attainable housing. We don't even call it affordable housing anymore. It has to be attainable. Improve access to housing to low to moderate income individuals, reduce the number of individuals and families experiencing homelessness, and promote and protect quality. So you look at Madison County, where Jackson is, over the next 10 years, we're expected to grow by 13,000 in our population. So today, our current public housing wait list is 1,300. Section 8 wait list, which was closed 2 years ago for applicants, is 1,400. Our Aging in Place program with Habitat wait list is 200. Number of homeless families served in our public school system today are 300. Single-family units needed by 2035 are roughly 3,500, and then multifamily units by 2035 are roughly 1,900. And so to address that demand, we're doing a permitting to allow greater density, allowing for accessory dwelling units, elimination of our parking minimums citywide, updating our master plan in 4 areas, utilization of American Rescue Plan funds to assist local nonprofits in down payment, rental, and utility assistance, as well as home repair programs. We're building our first men's homeless shelter, expected to be completed in summer 24. We've done our first ever TIF for residential areas. It's going to be a $350 million mixed-use development with a $20 million TIF. And then our next council meeting on Tuesday will be developing and creating a housing commission to study, develop, and implement housing action plans, including guidance on how to best utilize our incentive programs and encourage housing affordability. And then through our blight elimination program, create a land bank. In local areas, grants, tax credits, and then the governmental red tape to allow for job growth, housing abundance, to allow us to do that at the local level. And I'll be happy to answer questions when that time comes.
Director Hubbard?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. Having 5 minutes to talk about affordable housing or even an intro. I'm going to use my time to level set just for a minute. I'm happy to answer any questions about what we're doing in Nashville. But want to make sure we're all on the same page when we're talking about affordable housing. So all of us think about what 30% of our income is and having to pay more than that for housing. That makes all of us cost burden. So it's an issue that could affect any of us. That is more acute the lower your income is, and that's where we're seeing a pressure. So even a healthy community has a healthy supply of all housing, market rate, all the way to deeply affordable. When you don't have the upper part of that housing supply, it presses down on the land and the existing units, and folks with higher incomes, less barriers to credit and access tend to take up that spot where deeply affordable, low income people need to have that housing opportunity. So we need to think of it across that whole spectrum. But who really needs housing? So in the Nashville-Davidson County Metropolitan Statistical Area, we have the highest area median income of the MSAs in the state. That goes along with the higher cost of living. Affordable housing has such a terrible stigma that when you hear it, people immediately shut down. Someone making minimum wage, working full-time, is 30% of the area median income. This is someone working full-time. If they worked 2 jobs, they're still about 60% of the area median income. The market never develops without a subsidy or an incentive at these income levels. We can increase density to create that upper supply, but without some kind of other incentives or tools, we cannot create that type of housing for those income levels. Why is it important for your community to have housing across this entire income spectrum? These jobs, these minimum wage jobs, are a lot of your service industry that keeps your restaurants going, your basic services. When someone's paying more than 30% of their income, that's less money in your local economy. That's less sales tax dollars that you're realizing. We do a great job. I've worked in regional economic development of recruiting businesses and companies in all parts of our state. But at some point, we'll see a talent issue, a workforce issue, if we don't have places for people to live. And even if we're recruiting headquarters with 6-figure salaries, those multipliers, those other ancillary jobs that we're looking to create at those lower income levels, those folks need to have places to live too. And then I'll just finish with housing is also a social determinant of health. It puts more pressure on our public health system. It affects job performance, not having a stable, good quality place to live, as well as educational performance. So it's more than just housing. We often have talked about it in a vacuum, but it's actually not. I always say housing is a driver of or driven by economic development. And so as we look to even see how we can address housing as we pursue economic development opportunities, I think there's also a place for us to look to see how we can address housing through this too. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions you have.
Thank you. Director, I want to ensure I'm pronouncing your name. Is it Zena? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct. Okay, go ahead, Director.
Thank you. John Zena, I'm the director of the Memphis and Shelby County Division of Planning and Development. Our division is a joint agency of City of Memphis and Shelby County government. We have a number of responsibilities, most notably for this discussion. We have the planning and zoning departments for the city and county. We do construction, permitting and inspections for the city and county. We also lead the county's housing department, which works in concert with the city's division of housing on a number of programs and initiatives. One initiative that we partnered on last year between the city and the county was a joint housing policy plan. We recognized then, similar to the comments of the other panelists, that the landscape around housing supply and affordability had changed quite a bit just in a few years' time. And so we wanted to understand what were the key recommendations, what are the key actions that we need to be taking around addressing housing supply and affordability within the context of Memphis and Shelby County. We did so focused around 4 primary objectives based on our community's needs. Improving housing quality was the first. Supporting homeownership, we had seen a significant drop in homeownership occur over a 10-year period. Diversifying housing stock, creating more housing types throughout our community, and increasing high-quality rental housing for low-income citizens. If you look at housing supply in Memphis and Shelby County, on balance, in terms of availability, you're not going to see much of a numerical need. If you start to consider other factors, like the median household income in Memphis is $41,000, in Shelby County is $52,000, both of which are well below the national median, there is a need of about 30,000 new units that are geared towards those below 100% of area median income that starts to arise through considering those factors. If you also consider that the cost to build housing and the cost to rehabilitate housing in many of the areas of our community outweighs the value of the end product, that also contributes to a lot of the need in supply and affordability that we're seeing in our community. The housing policy plan organized our recommendations around several different types of actions, funding and financing support, coordinating the funding and financing that we have available at the city and county level, as well as seeking to leverage other sources of funding was a big part of that. We also looked at a number of regulatory strategies to help ease the cost of delivering housing. Tax reform was one of those. Zoning reform and building code reform were another two. I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks that we have the zoning and building departments as a part of my division. So some of our early actions in implementing our housing policy plan were related to zoning and building code reform. We took steps earlier this year. Our zoning code is jointly adopted by the City Council and County Commission. We took steps earlier this year to introduce amendments to the zoning code that made more housing types available in more places as a matter of right in our zoning code. We also reduced the minimum lot size for single-family housing in order to create more opportunities, particularly for new construction infill housing in our community. We also took steps a couple of years ago, shortly after the completion of our housing policy plan, to amend the building code. One of the local amendments that we proposed in order to make small multifamily more affordable was to move 3 to 6 unit buildings from the commercial code into the residential code and treat them as residential buildings. And there were additional changes that went along with that. That has met some challenges, most notably with the state fire marshal in terms of implementation of that. But since we have made those changes, there are a number of communities, not just here in Tennessee, but across the country, that have taken interest in at least looking at how building code reforms can help to address affordable housing and cost of building housing, not just locally, but across the country. And so we're hopeful that there is some progress that can be made in that arena of regulatory reform as well. Thank you again for having me, and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, panelists. We'll now open the floor for questions. Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mayor Carr. It's good to see you. It's been a long time. Just a couple of quick questions, and I will butcher your name as well, but I thought I would ask you. Mr. Director Zane, I guess, is that correct?
Zena.
My apologies. Well, you're from Shelby County. So. Mr. Zena, one of the questions that I find myself asking a lot as it relates to housing is, does your department look at the growth rate in the population for Shelby County in relation to the housing shortage rate? Are they growing at the same rate, I guess is the question. Oh, I thought he was Shelby County, my bad.
Memphis and Shelby County. The growth of the city and the county is relatively flat. So there is not much in terms of population growth However, the need for affordable housing and housing supply is not just a factor of population. It's also a factor of, I mentioned, income. It's also a factor of the existing housing stock, the quality of the existing housing stock, and the amount of housing that's being built, as well as the amount of housing that's being demolished.
Yes.
Follow-up question there. Sorry, I'm used to the rules of the House. If I can talk freely, I will. But a follow-up on that is when I look at the costs associated with local governments, former city councilman, before a state representative, I've noticed that those TIF programs, payment in lieu of tax programs, and IDBs that fund some of these programs, when I was a city councilman 15 years ago, those funding vehicles represented a very small percentage of new development jobs in our communities. Now those numbers, through partnerships with local government and ECD, are just more and more. I met with a group of investors in Shelby County a couple months ago having a discussion about this. Do you track how much lost revenue that the county and city is losing based upon those prior agreements for payment in lieu of tax agreements or TIF agreements? Their estimations think that it could be upwards of $30 million a year. Would you think it's that much?
I would not have an answer to that. My division does not track that information.
Well, maybe for the other groups, the reason why I'm saying that is normally payment in lieu of tax programs or theories were used for recruiting large industrial projects where you take farmland that has an industrial or light manufacturing use that's very little value, very little revenue, usually in a green belt. You take that property, which is very little revenue, and you defer taxes for 25 years on that property, knowing that the influx of jobs would generate revenue in your local communities. At the end of that period, though, you hope that that new revenue in areas of sales tax revenue and property tax revenue helps offset the others. Now we're doing it, however, in commercial properties across the state using payment in lieu of tax schemes on properties that were already pretty valuable, and then therefore taking them off the tax rolls. I guess to me, it seems like it's one of those things where it was a great idea in the beginning. I just wonder if any of you or your areas are tracking what these lost revenues may look like, and whether or not there's a no moss moment for you as it relates to property tax deferment.
So I can speak to that just a little bit. Currently, Rutherford County is involved in approving two TIFs, one in Smyrna and one in Murfreesboro. In both cases, Representative, the land development use is for currently idled city-owned property that is currently not on the tax roll. So by incorporating this TIF, we have set a pretty high threshold. In other words, we will require a 3-to-1 payback, which is pretty aggressive. Moreover, the TIF, we will not allow a TIF to go beyond 20 years, and we try to structure it so it actually pays off earlier than that. But the most important component about the TIFs that we're going to hopefully implement both in Smyrna and in Murfreesboro in the next literally couple of months is that we're taking property that is not on the tax roll and getting it on the tax roll. So now there is a positive revenue source back both to the city and to the county. Now that's, I'm just speaking on behalf of Rutherford County.
And yeah, I can talk about this for days. So in the world of TIF, obviously this is a little bit like impact fees, but the other side of the coin, much of that is actually funding the infrastructure that's needed adjacent to a project. So in Knoxville, there's an area called the South Waterfront that area, we're specifically paying for infrastructure that serves not only the development, it's typically adjacent to the development, but the broader community. So it's a little bit of a way to think about impact fees, but through public finance. In the way of pilot, you're right, those initially were much longer in term. I think we have, in Knoxville, Knox County, tried to whittle those back significantly, viewing it as if we can get this down to a 5 or 7 year incentive. We know what the new net taxes are going to be, especially on ground-up development for a new project, and it's going to pay significant dividends. We've got to wait a little bit for it. I thought Director Hubbard, Angie, made a great point earlier. Any sort of affordable or workforce housing that you're going to need is going to have some kind of incentive. We're also trying to utilize these pilots as an incentive to be able to create housing at 80% of area AMI within the context of market rate housing. So this would be stuff in Knoxville that's serving folks making $75,000, $100,000 a year, just to be able to live in communities that are not affordable on the whole, but are right adjacent to jobs and adjacent to good schools, that kind of thing. So there's a lot to talk about there, but good question.
And if I may add, Nashville has had a TIF study committee representative. I'm happy to share with you the results of that. And they've just concluded a tax abatement study committee. Also, when that report's final, I can share that with you. I will say we've created a new tax abatement program for mixed income housing. We have 2% affordability in our Nashville core, where we have lots of hospitality workers making low wages. We need to buy down that affordability, and we can't get those market rate developers to participate in a typical government program. So this tax abatement committee, tax abatement is to create 40% of those units for incomes at 75% of the area median income, but that abatement does not abate the baseline taxes. So we're not reducing and taking them completely off the tax rolls, but we are reducing what they would pay if it was fully built out. But for that trade-off, we're going to get 466 new units for a $3 million cap on our abatement, because Nashville does cap our abatement for new projects. For that $3 million cap, we're going to get 466 units, half of those downtown. We would not have that otherwise. So now we have less pressure on infrastructure with housing going out in places that can't support that, access to transit, access to jobs. So there's a policy trade-off with that as well.
Representative, you had one follow-up? Yes.
Either we're going to raise property taxes 34% and then give an abatement to somebody else, or we're going to increase impact fees and let the new developer come in and pay for it, or we're going to let the current tax base do it, or the only other way that's not taxing someone else to give someone else additional taxes is to take surplus revenues and help pay down the actual cost of what it costs to develop, similar to what you were describing in Knox County, which is of greater benefit for all those. And that seems to be really the only way to do it, but the only way that local governments can generate new revenue right now is either raise taxes, do impact fees on those new developers. And so it's kind of a catch-22. And so for me, I'm all ears as it relates to the discussion, because I don't know that there's a magic pill or a panacea as it relates to fixing a housing crisis that's so far behind with so many new people coming to Tennessee. So thanks for the time.
Thank you, Representative. Councilman Carlisle, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Williams, I will come and sit down with you as long as, when this thing shifted to TIFs and pilots, I got very excited. It's a bailiwick. I think our family, we've got about $1 billion worth of commercial real estate development that we've completed about $300 million, and we've got another $500 million to $700 million in the pipeline over the next 24 to 48 months that we're trying to accomplish in Shelby County. And I would genuinely be more than happy to sit down with you and give you our perspective on why it's necessary for a community like Memphis that doesn't have the growth and trajectory that Davidson County does. One of the things that we've been talking about is fees and building code and some of those upfront costs. Whether it is market rate or affordable housing, if any one of you, or in particular Director Zini, because I know we deal with a public utility that we often don't talk about is electrical services and electrical demand. For market rate of projects, if we have a 400-unit apartment project downtown that we got underway and didn't get our transformer bill until halfway through the project, and it was about $500,000 and change, roughly. Can one of you touch base on things that locally owned power companies can do, possibly as credits or upfront reprieves that could help some of the affordable housing costs as a percentage of the project? I'll send it to you, Director Zena, since we've discussed this previously.
Thank you. So there are a lot of, I think, I'll call them hidden costs that go into constructing housing that I think a lot of times we don't think about, especially when we think of how those hidden costs associate with regulations that get put in place for a variety of reasons. And so through our work on the housing policy plan, we've looked at, as I mentioned, not only the zoning code and building code that I have some control over as a part of my division, but also we consider what the inherent costs are for folks who are trying to do projects large and small, working with the utility. In a lot of the areas that we're trying to see redevelopment in our community, many of these are small lots in communities where there may have been prior development that have been demolished. As a result of that, demolition, there are new costs associated with a builder going in, trying to do an affordable housing project, and they're facing a higher cost to connect to utilities than if someone were building on a greenfield site further out, because of the fact that that lot has been previously developed, because there's been previous demolition there in the state of what has been put in place. The other thing, too, I guess, and Councilman Carlisle, more to your point, is on the utility side, there is, at least in our jurisdiction, a very lengthy and complex schedule of fees related to utility construction work that has to be done to connect any project to utilities. And oftentimes, that schedule of fees is difficult to decipher and can't be fully calculated by the developer on the front end. And so they're having to bear a much greater risk on the front end as they go into the project, only to wait until the end to get the real cost. And anything that we can do, and then maybe this is a theme across sort of the regulatory bucket of changes, anything that we can do to reduce risk for particularly projects that are going into infill areas of our cities across Tennessee can be significant changes to help reduce those upfront costs that are costs that wouldn't have to be paid in the first place.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Christensen, I couldn't agree more with your summary and thesis on own versus rent. Mr. Strickland and his staff had the opportunity to talk to one of our CDCs, The Works, which is taking on neighborhoods with 400 or 500 lots of infill development and trying to look at things like the shared equity model, resources around it, all the outcomes you talked about. Could you expound a little bit on the practicality of how the regulatory bodies or the legislative body could help? Because what I see in our community is after 2008 and the recession, we were lucky enough to have large institutional private equity come in, buy households from anywhere from the $50,000 to the $250,000, $350,000 middle class homes because of the stability and the lack of delinquency, which was hugely helpful for the tax rolls. Well, now that model has turned into a multi-billion-dollar private equity play, including subdivisions now being built solely for the purpose of rental. So it has made it incredibly difficult, to Mr. Zena's point and others, that even if we have the housing that's there, the only thing that's available that somebody could potentially buy is either not up to code, has been demolished, it's an empty lot, and so therefore it doesn't produce for the tax rolls. And I'll just add on, and then I'll be quiet, so if you could expound on it. But there are down payment assistance programs. They're usually not enough to get somebody there. There are calculations about PITI as a percentage of someone's front end and back end ratios, but it doesn't take into account living expenses like renting a car, or rather a lease payment for a car, groceries, utilities. And then obviously for people that are in my community, one of the biggest things when they go to apply for a loan is their credit rating. And so all of these things that have occurred when they were, 18, 19, 20 years old or even later in life have significant impacts on whether or not they can actually qualify to buy a home and then afford to keep that home and stabilize those neighborhoods. And then you also have the gentrification impact once you've actually been successful of how you don't take somebody that's been in a neighborhood for 30 years, go in and do what they ask you to do, and then they no longer can afford it because they're senior fixed income. So I know I kind of threw a lot out there, but if you could expound on those challenges, because it sounds really good, because I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, yeah, that makes sense to me. Let's go attack this problem. Let's look at HUD programs. But when you get down to the rubber meeting the road, it is much more difficult to get shifted from rental, dependency on rentals to home ownership.
So I don't disagree at all. You did have a number of questions in there, I think, or statements. I'm not sure where to begin. But, my grandfather from Carter County, Elizabethton, he used to say when I work on a project with him that you had two kinds of tools. You had hammers and you had levers, right? You get anything, and it's like you're either going to hit it or you're going to twist it. We basically have two parts in affordable housing that are available to us. There's zoning incentives and there's subsidies. And with zoning incentives pretty much off the table in the state of Tennessee without local option to incentivize particular uses, we're stuck with subsidies. And what does that mean? It's exactly what Representative Williams said. It's taxation. One of the low-hanging pieces of fruit, and you'll hear from Ralph Perry tomorrow, that you could look at as a legislative body is to actually fully fund the Housing Trust Fund, to actually give an opportunity for THDA to look statewide at how they can quickly invest capital into ownership, because there is a curve. There are two really things that you're looking at there. When you're doing build to rent, which is a very common thing in Chattanooga, Hamilton County right now, you are looking at scaling up rapidly, right? You have investors that are typically out of state. You have investors that are typically highly leveraged in their capital, and they are risk tolerant. They're willing to come in because they know that their back end is going to pay out substantially. When you're looking at people doing affordable housing and they're building to sell, you don't really have that incentivization, right? You don't have that high back end profit that's available. So you're not going to see it scale up quickly unless you look at heavy subsidy. To your further point, when you look at a community that you actually want to have people that have been in rental and they have been in long-term subsidized rental, typically, they've never unclogged their own toilet, right? They've never learned that the brown spot in the roof is a reason to stop what you're doing and go figure out where the water's coming from, or else your house is going to fall down around you. So homeowner education becomes a critical component. I do believe that there are models that incorporate shared equity. We're seeing it with major developments in North Carolina, South Carolina, through Habitat affiliates, through CDCs, through other groups where it has mixed income opportunity, and you actually get to scale up very rapidly with having rental, ownership, condo, townhome, multi-mixed use opportunities in that community. And frankly, I think that's probably where the future is when you invest in home ownership and equity building, is you got to look in those models. Yes, you need shared equity and down payment assistance. Yes, you need to look at pilot TIF, anything that you can use to get that. But in the end, what is the tool? The tool is a subsidy. And what are we going to argue about? To Representative Williams' point, we're going to argue about who's being taxed. Ultimately, at some point, we have a duty to care for folks and to provide housing opportunities for citizens of the state. How are we going to fund it? How are we going to bankroll it? Those different models, whether you look at CLT, a land trust, whether you look at shared equity, they all ultimately come down to subsidy. They're just different terms and methodologies for how you carve up the pie.
Any other questions? Mayor Anderson. Oh, Mayor Waters, were you first? Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Affordable housing is very difficult. We've been working on it in Sevier County for a long time. I have a task force working on it, and we did a study, and our vacancy rate is less than 1%. If you want to work in Sevier County, you can't find a home or an apartment. We about 3 years ago, we went on purposely tried to recruit apartments and worked with THDA, worked with some pilot programs. We got over 3,000 apartments built in about 3 years, and every one of them is full with hundreds on a waiting list. Every one of them. I don't know who's living in them, but somebody is. And so we've been looking at how to encourage, because I'm one that doesn't believe government needs to be involved in the housing, building of housing or running housing. That's a private sector endeavor, but looking at ways to encourage the private sector. I guess my question to any of you is, we did some pilot programs, and we tried to, in these programs, we tried to make sure that the rents were affordable for the people that moved into the apartments. And what we've found is, in some instances, the owners of the apartments, because they have 500 people on a waiting list, the first thing we know is those rents are beginning to creep up past what the agreement was initially, we think, and it's happening in more than one instance. And any of you can address this. What kind of mechanism do you all have in place that if you participate with a pilot or you participate in a subsidy or anything to monitor that, which is a big task, to monitor these folks that are renting these entities? How are you making sure that they don't increase those rents past what the initial agreement was? And any of you can address that.
Since we do that work, I'll take that one. Thank you, Mayor. Restrictive covenants and language in the pilot agreement for default are the legal technical ways to keep that from happening. And you have to be very specific, obviously, in what you want that rent structure to look like. We're an organization that, because of our management of affordable housing, we have experience in that space. I know a lot of organizations in y'all's community have that same experience. So I think identifying somebody that does, is familiar with HUD, is familiar with the tax credit program, knows about AMIs and FMRs and all the lingo that they use, having them identified up front to, if not enforce, at least be the one that goes in with some kind of annual check on the owner to make sure they're doing what they said they did. Because if you're providing an incentive as a community, you need to be expecting the thing that you've asked for. So yeah, that's how we do it. And we go in on an annual basis, kind of like an audit, and we make sure that at initial occupancy and then at that point in the year, the owner is doing what they said they're going to do on, in some cases, it's a portion of the units, so it may only be 20% of the units in a given property, or it sounds like in your case, some of the whole properties were affordable, and we would just look at those on a spot check basis and make sure they're doing it.
Have you ever had to move to some kind of legal enforcement on any of them?
Well, in the case of the pilot, it would be a default of the agreement and the abatement would go away, and that's a pretty big...
Have you ever done that?
We have not had to do that to this point, no.
I would add to that it's a lot easier to enforce in ownership than it is in rental. With rental, you're going to have to recertify annually, so you do have to have some sort of, it's going to be based also on your incentivization. What did you do to incentivize the builder to actually comply with this expectation? Is it 60% of AMI? Is it 80? Where do you fall on that scale to what you were saying with the percentage of units? You're going to have a certain number of units where the income has to be below a certain level for those residents. In ownership, you do it at title transfer, right? So it's actually very easily done in an RC where you have a restrictive covenant attached to your title, register with the Register of Deeds. When the title company goes to transfer title, they see it, they realize it, and you actually have to qualify income at that moment. But with rental, you actually do have to put the onus, the burden upon the development company, whoever the developer is and whoever's going to manage that property, to do annual recertifications. And you definitely need to put into your language that if they fail to comply with that, there is a penalty. And we have seen that happen in Chattanooga with developers, certainly.
Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question, it's a question more to the TIF and the pilot. Mayor Carr is not a county mayor that has to pay for the schools. So, Mayor Connor, you said you did a pilot program or a TIF in Jackson?
Yes, sir. We're doing our first TIF. We just, council voted on it and our county commission voted on it several months ago. And so that was land that was in a farm program. The county taxes were $2,000 a year. It was 260 acres. We were annexing the land now to be city property. And so the floor is really low. And so it's a 20-year, $20 million pilot, whichever is first.
So, Madam Chairman, just to follow up, if you don't mind, did you TIF your pennies for your public schools?
Yes, we do that. Any county TIF, any county pilot, we take out the public school allocation before we do any of that work.
So the TIF does not include the public school portion?
The relief does not, no. The public schools get their portion before the TIF is implemented.
But do you share, and let me go at it the back doorway, do you then share with that the TIF of the total tax rate, the percentage that you're giving back to the housing unit?
No, the growth, for the public school portion, the growth is separate from the TIF incentive, and so the growth for this public schools is going to grow as the tax base grows.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Mayor.
Thank you, Chairman. Chief Executive Christensen, nobody loves a picture more than me, so I appreciate the graphs. On this, my curiosity would be, because of the nature of people that may need affordable housing, then the hospitality industry, beginning in the workforce, younger people, is there a way we can factor into this about the mobility of these individuals moved through their strata and salaries? I mean, I don't know if I'm making it clear, but basically young folks, people that are on that end of the economic spectrum, purchasing a house, staying in it long enough to build up equity to pay for their closing cost, that's really probably not factored in this versus a rent. And that makes sense, or I just make that up?
No, so I actually agree that the landscape has to have a mixture of that. Okay, so in no way do I want anyone to construe my argument for affordable housing as an ownership vehicle to be a argument against developing rental units. You absolutely will need to have rental units in your makeup. I mean, it's a menu, and you need to be addressing that. And candidly, when you get below about 50% of area median income, even a habitat model is challenging to sustain for someone on full ownership. And that's when you really need to start looking at shared equity or land trust models, where you start to give people the ability to build equity or an ownership stake in the home, but they may not necessarily own 100% of the home, because the subsidy would just be too extreme, and it would never sort of like cycle back in to that area. To your other point, as they look at their kind of, I mean, you do want them to move through social strata. You want a person to move into home ownership and to become a person who is contributing to the tax base, right? Ultimately, you want them to grow their income. So you do have to look at the ownership model is an at-qualification model. And with Habitat specifically, we build in a 15 or 20 year, depending on the funding sources that we use, period, where if they transfer title, they then either owe you money back immediately that's substantial out of the equity, or it must be sold to another person under 80% of area median income. So you do have some triggers that you can put into your restrictive covenant that allow you to sustain that unit as affordable housing while allowing someone to actually build their income and maybe even grow their family and move into market rate housing. And frankly, I think that's ideal, right? If you use a subsidy once to get someone into affordable housing, wouldn't it be great if that subsidy is recycled instead of coming from further taxation?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Peach.
Mayor Carr, in Rutherford County, we have so much growth. Are you finding it's difficult with affordable housing? You finding it's difficult to balance the existing residents' affordability versus your new residents? And secondly, are there other issues you think the TACIR should be studying related to this, and are there other legislative tools that you would need to deal with this?
Thank you for that question. As I sit here and listen to the panelists, I'm struck by the diversity of thought as it relates to the scope regarding the challenge of the problem. Not to denigrate anybody's position, but the challenges that East and West Tennessee have with regard to affordable housing aren't necessarily the same kind of problem that Rutherford County or perhaps Sevier County or Williamson County or Dixon County are having. What we are experiencing is a boom in population that literally is pricing out the existing affordable housing. I'm reminded of a situation where if you want to drain the bathtub, turn off the spigot before you start to pump the water out. And so what we need to do in Rutherford County, and I imagine some of the other counties that are experiencing the kind of growth that we have, is we need to hold on to that attainable of affordable housing that currently exists. Let me give you a statistic. In January 2021, the median household house for sale in Rutherford County, that's a 2,400 square foot home, the median was $300,000. That was the sale price for the median. 2 years later, in January 2023, that very same home sold for $459,000. That's a 50% increase. That kind of upward pressure on the housing market literally takes away any affordable housing that previously may have existed. And so for Rutherford County, we need the tools to compete, to maintain a balance that may exist, but that is quickly eroding away. And I wish Representative Williams were still here, because I would like to offer an alternative to the idea or the argument that development taxes or impact fees are somehow not an attractive conservative solution to providing affordable housing. Because here's what happens. In Rutherford County, Murfreesboro, Smyrna, and Laverne, and Eagleville are able to assess impact fees and development taxes on new residential development, thereby holding on to the existing affordable housing in that community. Rutherford County is not able to do that because of the County Powers Relief Act of 2006. And so we are moving, Rutherford County is very quickly going to move to a Rutherford County community development program. But what we need is we need to turn off the spigot of putting so much upward pressure on the housing market, because it won't matter what we do as a community if the influx of 9,000 to 10,000 new residents every single year, and by the way, that's the Tennessee Comptroller's Office number, that's not mine, and 1,200 to 1,500 new students at a cost of almost $10,000 just to educate those students. By the way, that's operating cost, that's not building cost. I just signed a bond this morning for $180 million to just renovate 3 high schools. And in the next 3 years, we will have to issue bonds of over $600 million just to build new schools. That we're getting ready to price ourselves completely out of the affordable, attainable housing market unless the Tennessee General Assembly gives each community, all 95 counties, the specific tools they need to address that specific problem. Because there's not a cookie-cutter solution here. What Memphis needs is not what Rutherford County needs. What Chattanooga needs or Knoxville needs is not what Rutherford County needs. And I do believe that the county mayors, the city mayors, councilmen, and the commissioners have a pretty good understanding, because they're all dialed into how do we maintain attainable housing or affordable housing, because unless we do that, we're going to have homeless people out on the streets. That's just where we're headed, and that's not a tolerable situation. So to the question of what can the General Assembly do to assist local governments, don't be so general that there's a cookie-cutter solution, but allow us the flexibility to come up with the solutions that meet our individual needs. Sorry.
Mayor Brown, you are recognized.
I appreciate your question so very much, because I was interested in when the impact fee part of the conversation might come up. And I would add to what you said, Mayor, that in addition to the counties having that ability, there are cities that do not as well. We're a private act charter city.
Correct.
The fear
I apologize. I didn't mean to imply that they all did.
Right, right. And I really, I say that because people don't know unless they're affected. But I agree with you. In fact, the city of Gallatin, our council members have asked for the same opportunity this year of the legislature. However, I do not understand how that doesn't impact housing affordability. I also do not understand how, what the solution is to keep it being an anti-growth tool by local legislators who want no change. And I feel a bit presumptive saying that in this room, but I don't hear that discussed. I discuss that with our legislators, and there are people in local government that, you know, our traffic's too bad, we shouldn't allow any more growth. We truly, and we have to build new schools, and our school growth rate has stayed very constant in our county for 25 years at about 1.5% a year. Obviously, our sales tax has gone up significantly, and so I fear impact fees and an unwillingness to waive them as incentives for workforce housing. I fear that is a tool that can hurt us more on the attainable housing front. And I appreciate your question so much when I ask, is it your new residents or your existing residents that are having challenges with affordability? Because in our community is entirely existing residents. New residents come here with plenty of money to buy whatever. And I liked what Ms. Hubbard said about the pressure, even not enough availability in the more expensive stock putting pressure on the lower. But I would contend the interest rates are doing that too, because who's going to leave a low interest rate financed home and move up at the time that, a lot of people typically would move up to a more expensive home and take on a higher interest rate loans. So there's a lot of pressure, but I hadn't really thought about that, about how it presses down and takes up that inventory that may then come open. And I also appreciate the comment about incentives on redevelopment, because that's something that I've always thought, how do you make that work? But the reality is at the local level, we don't have incentives to offer. We're worried about funding our local government, and when you don't have impact fees that you can waive as incentives, there's nothing, that a local government can do, the size of our community. So anyway, I would appreciate any further comments on impact fees, affordability on housing.
Well, if I could continue. Thank you. And I'm just speaking for Rutherford County. I'm not sure how unique our situation is, but I have looked at this, and I actually looked at the definition of infrastructure, which is and been in the development community for a while. A developer goes in and takes 200 acres and maps out 400 lots for 400 homes. They're required, at least in Rutherford County, to provide essential services to those 400 lots: electricity, water, sewer, and in many cases, high-speed internet. And that is quite honestly well understood to be infrastructure that is passed on to the home builder, subsequently passed on to the homeowner. However, the literal definition of infrastructure is not confined to water, sewer, and electricity. It also includes schools, fire, EMS, and law enforcement. And those are just as critical to the homeowner, the new homeowner, as the aforementioned water, sewer, and electricity. But the fact of the matter is some municipalities and some counties do not have the ability to require the developer to pay for those expanded services. The other thing I would say is that property taxes are an extremely inefficient way to pay for growth, because what property taxes were originally designed for is the maintenance and upgrade of the existing service provided. That was what it's for, the maintenance and upgrade of the existing service. So when you have an expansion of that service, who pays for that expanded service? Well, it should be that development should pay for that expanded service, not the property tax owner that's from across the county that receives no benefit from it. And so what we do is we literally, by doing this, we hold down the pressure that's upwardly building on those already built houses because of an influx in population. And I think we'll see quite success in our ability to do that if we're given the tools to appropriately distribute the cost of development where it belongs.
So in Hamilton County, it's kind of a pressure cooker right now with the growth of influx of people as well. It's a similar situation to what you were talking about. We're growing so rapidly, and the people that are coming in, they're just like your folks. They have plenty of money. Okay, they're coming in from New York, from California, from Chicago. They're coming in and buying what was a $250,000 home on the lake and is now a $650,000 home on the lake, and it's going up and it's exceeding $1 million at this point. And when we look at that kind of situation, it's interesting. They're talking a lot about short-term vacation rentals. Well, they should be thinking about the influx of growth and the fact that that's what's really driving it up, not a few private developer or private investors who are buying 150 houses in a so many thousand house community. But one of the things that I hear a lot from our
Mr.
city
Christensen,
government,
could you speak a little closer to your microphone?
Yeah,
Thank
one
you.
of the things I hear a lot from our city government, and it's a major concern for them, is that these restrictions that are placed on statewide. You were talking about a cookie cutter kind of situation, well, if you look at who can abate property taxes, what are the laws surrounding that? Okay, can you have property tax abatement for certain uses or not? Okay, that is something that's actually regulated at state level, right? That could be nice to have a local option to talk about it. When you look at impact fees or development taxes, I mean, they are taxes, right? But if there were a local option to determine how they were used, I think it would make a lot more sense. The same thing with zoning options. If you empower the local government and the local folks, even the ones who want to complain about the parking that you brought up as a joke earlier, but they can make better decisions on a local level. Do we need to regulate it on a state level? Absolutely, because why? It needs to be something that is considered uniform across conservative values across the conservative state. But what is more available on a local level than a conservative value, right, to make a decision and think about it? So to me, our government asks about that, or our city government more than anything asks about that a lot. What if we could make decisions about who is abated from property taxes, about what our zoning incentives are, and about whether or not we're going to assess these fees on a local level? So the tools that you're talking about, if you're giving them to those local governments, it does allow you to look at a difference between a Shelby County where it's flat population growth and your county where it's growing exponentially month over month.
Any other responses from Mayor Brown? Any other questions from Representative Williams?
Thank you, 2.0. Sorry I had to step out for a minute, but I was able to listen to the back and Chancellor. The question I have for you is, what do we say to the existing taxpayer who each of you said these people were coming in from out of town, they're overpaying for what the value of the property is, driving up the cost? What do we say to all those people that have been paying taxes in our community for 25 years who can't move? We say, well, if you want to move, or like someone over here in South Gulch who is in a 1,200 square foot house with two $2.7 million homes on the other side of them. You know, those people are stuck. Impact fees are going to impact them eventually, and it's going to start impacting. And so we may be on the front end of this problem, but it's not a problem that's going away for the current taxpayer. It's a problem that's going to continue to be here. So impact fees may be a short-term solution to help pay for fire and water, but you also have the growth of your sales tax growth and revenue that we've all seen over the past several years. So I recognize that there are some challenges there, but as the good mayor knows, we shrink government, government grows. We grow government, then revenue shrinks. And so it's pretty proven fact, particularly in Tennessee, which is why we have so many people moving here from those bluer places. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
If I could, Madam Chair?
Yes.
So you're exactly right. And unfortunately, I have the dubious distinction, Representative, of proposing a 16%, 26-cent property tax hike when I came into office that I had no idea that I was going to have to do. So did we grow government? Absolutely. Do I think it was unnecessary? You bet. Was it required? Without question. We walked in and we had a $64 million deficit, a record deficit for Rutherford County, breaking the previous year's deficit of $31 million. So how did we get to that deficit? We got to that deficit because Rutherford County doesn't have the tools to make sure that growth pays for itself. And so that growth was literally put on the credit card. When I got into the office, the credit card payment came due. And so you are 100% correct. How do we do this without growing government? And all I'm saying is anybody who wants to develop a 200-acre farm and put 400 homes on there, they should pay for the infrastructure required for that development. That includes water, sewer, electricity, but it also includes fire, EMS, law enforcement, and schools. Those things are just as much infrastructure as it takes for codes to say you don't get a certification of occupancy without these things. And so all I'm saying is I'm all for growth. If you're not growing, you're dying. We've got to grow. But we've got to get growth to a point where it pays for itself, so when the property taxes come online for that new development, those property taxes pay for the maintenance and upgrading the newly expanded service.
Mr. Peach, you had another question?
I'll be brief, Chairman. It's a little bit of a rhetorical question, Mayor Carr, but
I like those.
Right. So you stated that within your county is City of Murfreesboro, Smyrna, and Laverne.
And Eagleville.
And Eagleville. And all three or all four of those have impact fees?
3 of the 4 have impact fees. Murfreesboro just instituted a $7,800 impact fee for schools and parks. I believe Smyrna just voted to raise their 2 impact fees, and Laverne currently has 3 impact fees to pay for new residential development.
And you stated that Rutherford County is the fastest growing county in Tennessee.
Rutherford County is the fastest growing county in Tennessee, according to the Tennessee Comptroller's Report, and the 43rd fastest growing county in the country.
And would you say that these impact fees of the municipalities that are the lion's share of your county, that has impeded growth with their impact fee?
I wouldn't say it's impeded growth. It's complicated things because Rutherford County has one of the top 90 school districts in the country by population. And so with the exception of Murfreesboro, that has about 6,000 students, Rutherford County has over 50,000 students, and it currently occupies over 75% of our budget.
I guess my point to you was, and you might have missed, all of these cities have impact fees, but it's not true that it's stopping growth by having these impact fees.
Oh, no, quite the contrary. And yet, as a matter of fact, it's relieving some pressure within the municipalities for attainable and affordable housing, which is the argument I'm making. If this body is interested in trying to find solutions for affordable, attainable housing, then we've got to relieve that pressure that is on the existing housing so we can retain that housing for affordable housing. Because the developers are, and rightfully so, they're going to develop and market, especially where land is scarce, like in Rutherford County, they're going to market and develop those properties with the highest margins possible. That typically means housing that is beyond the typical, what's referred to, affordable range.
It's usually location and infrastructure is what drives growth, isn't it, Mayor?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Representative Williams, you're recognized.
Appreciate the comments. I do have been doing a little bit of research about this. When Nashville increased their property taxes by 34%, they were one of the fastest growing communities in the state. What they saw is a vast reduction within 6 months of the increase of that, and the number of transactions and the property values flattened. Fact of the matter is, if you overtax someone, what will end up happening is they'll stop moving to your community. So you have to be very careful about whether you do it or not. I just think it's interesting. We have to look at the constituency or our citizens as a whole and not based upon those who are coming here and their ability to pay. Thank you.
Any other questions for our panelists? Yes, Mayor Waters.
I have a quick one just for any of you. Do you have an issue we're having in Sevier County is overnight rentals. You can make twice as much money on an overnight rental as you can renting a home in a year. And so everybody that is building something in Sevier County is trying to build an overnight rental. Now, zoning is one way you can address that, but we've also got neighborhoods that folks in them now see how much money is being made in some of these overnight rentals, and so they're turning their, trying to turn their homes into overnight rentals. Does anybody else have that issue? It's becoming more and more an issue that is affecting the housing market because it's reducing the number of houses available for folks that work in the county and folks that want to move in the county. And it is also driving up the price of homes in the county because if you've got an overnight rental, you can pay a lot more if you're buying that and you know you can rent it overnight. You can pay a lot more money for it because you've got twice as much money. You've got a lot of money coming in. Is anyone else having that issue with either overnight rentals or VRBO rentals in your communities?
Back on. So we do see that as a challenge, especially where land costs are an issue for building housing that could be affordable when you can come in and create. And then there's a function of zoning. We actually lost because we don't have the regulatory ability around affordable housing. We lost the ability to work with a potential developer that could have created affordable housing. With the land cost, and we didn't have any other tools, they ended up building a short-term rental complex, to be honest, in an area that would have been great for us to have housing available for hospitality workers. It's disruptive to neighborhoods. Parking, not just the parties and the calling police because of loud noise, it's disruptive to neighbors, parking issues, pressure on infrastructure on small neighborhood streets. So it's an infrastructure pressure, it's a housing pressure, it's neighborhood destabilization, all of those things that we're experiencing. And then on the other side, a little bit hamstrung on how far we can regulate.
Representative Williams.
And the thing about it is, it's a difficult balance between private property rights and their ability to do what they want to with their property and what we're trying to do and provide affordable housing. It's a difficult balance to get and one that I find very challenging.
Thank you, Mayor. Representative Williams.
Thank you. I will say, Mayor, as a former property owner in Metro Nashville, they have an ordinance here where they can take your short-term rental even though you've had a short-term rental agreement with the city for years. And so you by ordinance could, through planning and zoning, could create an ordinance by which you could prohibit that in certain areas in your city. I'm happy to help you get that language. The state gave you the opportunity gave local governments the ability to do that. How you would do it wouldn't be as specific or similar to how Metro Nashville does it, but the state did give you tools in order to take away someone's property right to do that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'll do that on my last term.
Is that three more terms, Mayor? Any other questions? Panelists, thank you so much. It was an excellent panel. Thank you to Dr. Lippard and his team for allowing so much time, and we've got another panel tomorrow on this very same subject. Obviously, there is a lot of interest and, as Mayor Carr said, diversity of thought that is on the panel today. So thank you all. Next, if you will turn to tab 5, we are looking at tax and restaurant regulations. We have a draft report for review and comment. Madison Moffitt will deliver this presentation.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Good afternoon, Commission members. My name is Madison Moffitt, and today I will present the draft report on the liquor by the drink tax and restaurant regulations for your review and comment. You can find a copy of the report behind tab 5 if you're not already turned there. And the final report will be presented for your approval at the December meeting. This report was prepared in response to Senate Bill 2262 by Senator Briggs and House Bill 2419 by Representative Manis during the 112th General Assembly. The bill directed the Commission to study the liquor by the drink tax and other similar taxes for on-premise consumption, the licensing, permitting, and other fees under Title 57, Chapters 4 and 5 for the restaurant industry, staffing challenges concerning server permits, wages, and the applicable training necessary to operate such restaurants, as well as other barriers for entry for restaurants that may be minimized or mitigated as identified by the Commission during the study. A copy of the Senate bill is available in Appendix A of the draft report. During the June 2023 meeting, we heard from a panel of 6 experts. Since then, the Commission has identified 2 alternatives to make opening and operating a restaurant easier for businesses without reducing state and local revenue or compromising public health and safety. In addition, the General Assembly has already acted on one of the restaurant industry's concerns by passing Public Chapter 355, Acts of 2023. This act reduced restrictions in state law that keep some people from obtaining a server permit from the Tennessee Alcoholic Beverage Commission because of previous convictions. The Tennessee Alcoholic Beverage Commission requires businesses to obtain several documents from federal, state, and local agencies to apply for a liquor license. One of these documents is a certificate of occupancy and use, which is necessary for restaurants to obtain before they can open for business. However, any delay between the time a restaurant receives its certificate and the time its liquor license application is processed could result in a delay in the restaurant's opening or prevent it from selling liquor when it does. The TABC does accept a temporary certificate of occupancy and use. However, some restaurant owners are not aware. Clarifying on the application which documents are accepted could reduce the cost and time for businesses during the application process. The TABC has previously worked with Strategic Technology Services, or SDS, to expedite the liquor licensing process by launching an online portal for applications in 2018, as well as receiving supporting documents for applicants from the Tennessee Department of Revenue automatically. STS serves as the Central Information Technology Service Bureau for state departments, including the TABC. Additionally, automating certain parts of the liquor licensing application could further expedite the process for applicants. For these reasons, the draft report recommends that both the Tennessee Alcoholic Beverage Commission inform applicants that it accepts temporary occupancy and use permits for liquor license applications, and that STS continue to explore ways to automate the liquor licensing application process further. Next, Tennessee's post and hold law requires wholesalers to maintain a wholesale price list for every case or package of beer sold. Once a price is posted, wholesalers may not lower their prices for 360 days, which is longer than in any other state with similar post and hold requirements. Modifying or eliminating the state's post and hold law is unlikely to lead to a spike in alcohol consumption and related harms, and the law no longer serves its stated purpose related to tax avoidance. Therefore, the draft report recommends that the General Assembly either repeal the post and hold requirements in state law or reduce the hold period to 180 days or less to align Tennessee with other states that have post and hold requirements. Furthermore, while lowering the state's 15% liquor by the drink tax rate would benefit restaurants, doing so could raise public health concerns and reduce the tax revenue received and used by local governments and K-12 education. You can look at Table 1 on page 4 for the estimated effects if the tax rate were to be reduced or eliminated. And as a result, the draft report makes no recommendation regarding the liquor by the drink tax rate. That concludes my presentation, and I'm now open for questions and comments.
Any questions? You've heard the draft report. It's open for your comment and review. Any questions for Ms. Moffitt? Any comments or remarks? Thank you, Ms. Moffitt.
Thank you.
Next, Tyler Carpenter, tab 6, the effect of COVID-19 recession on public infrastructure needs, phase 2.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Members of the Commission, my name is Tyler Carpenter, and I'm here today to present Phase 2 of a two-part staff report that evaluated the effect of the COVID-19 recession on public infrastructure needs. The first phase was presented in 2021. The second phase is being presented now for your review and comment, but does not require a vote. As discussed in the first phase, beginning in early 2020, the world was faced with unanticipated challenges prompted by the spread of COVID-19 and the resulting recession. Whether or the extent to which these challenges affected the public infrastructure needs of Tennessee communities was among the many uncertainties stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic. The first phase analyzed the effect of the Great Recession on public infrastructure needs. Staff then used the findings as a baseline for the second phase for analyzing whether or to what extent the COVID-19 recession affected the public infrastructure needs reported in Tennessee as of July 1st, 2021. Staff found that neither the Great Recession nor the COVID-19 recession had an overall effect on reported public infrastructure needs. However, technology is one type of education need. However, technology, which is one type of education need, was affected by the COVID-19 pandemic itself. If you will turn to page 6, you'll see in Figure 2 that technology needs increased by 82% per capita from 2019 to 2020, a total increase of $103.7 million. Included in this increase are purchases of laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots for remote learning. Staff also reviewed common funding sources for public infrastructure during both recessions. Public infrastructure is in large part funded through state and local sales taxes, motor fuel taxes, and federal funding. The economic effect of the COVID-19 pandemic recession on tax revenue was shorter and deeper than the Great Recession, but the recovery was swift. As you can see in Figure 6 on page 11, tax collections in Tennessee performed better than expected overall in 2020 and continue to grow, at least partly because of sales tax revenue from online sales. Next, if you'll direct your attention to Figure 7 on page 12, you will see that monthly fuel tax collections have been temporarily affected, dropping from $97.5 million to $69.8 million from May 2019 to May 2020. Collections remained below pre-pandemic levels until May 2021. Lastly, the federal government passed several funding assistance measures that may have directly or indirectly affected the need for public infrastructure, though longer-term effects of federal funding that became available after July 1, 2021 are not captured in the data. For example, air filtration systems could be a new type of need for schools in the future. And in fact, in 2021, one school district in Tennessee reported the need for air filtration in all schoolrooms as part of a large district-wide strategy for energy efficiency. Staff will continue to analyze trends, which will be reported in the annual infrastructure report. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
The floor is open for questions or comment. Any comments for Mr. Carpenter? All right, thank you, Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you.
Director Lippard. That's it? Okay. Thank you for suffering through any errors I may have made today. It almost became question time at Parliament, so Chairman Yeager may scold me afterwards if he's watching online. But thank you all. You can leave your books. You're welcome to take them as well. We will see you in the morning. We will begin at 8:30. Thank you.